Hey Porsche fans, Daniel here. This is not one of my detailed how-tos on changing brakes. It's only going to be tips and tricks and specific tools for those of you that already have experience changing brake pads in your car. If you've never done one on the Porsche, this is going to help you out because every brake system on every car has its own little idiosyncrasies, and this has some, especially some big red flags you need to watch out for. If you need beginner videos, I've got those, like 3 of them, down in the description. You'll find links. And hopefully this video condenses everything for you so you don't have to spend hours like I did digging around on forums, Facebook groups, and other videos. You're going to learn everything you need to know right here. So let's get started. Remember folks that this video is actually its own little social post, right? There are comments down below that you can add in. If you see any mistakes or see something that can be done better or just fully agree with something, please comment below and everybody should read that stuff. I can't edit the videos once they're uploaded, so I put all my changes and updates down below. Before we get started on the brake system, why am I changing my pads? Well, I've got 10,000 miles in the car, 5 track days, a bunch of autocross, and the pads still have 8 or 9 millimeters on them, which is plenty. However, I noticed that on the most high-speed braking zones, the bite is still good initially, but then it does start to fade. Fluid's good, rotors are good, so all I can say is probably the pads have just about had it. So my neighbor, John, is actually one of the owners of SP Motorsports. If you don't know about SP Motorsports, check out their website. They sell all sorts of parts and supplies for your Porsche. They race their cars. They have a shop here in the San Francisco Bay Area. You can get an alignment, get parts installed, and they'll even do an arrive and drive thing with a track car. You can just show up at the track. They'll have a whole team and a car ready for you. Pretty cool, so check them out. John suggested I try one of their brake pads. They have a couple they recommend. They have an endurance pad as well as it's called the Clubsport pad. These pad compounds are designed for SP Motorsports by Advanced Friction Performance, so they won't have SP's label on them, but it's what they use. And I said, you know what, it doesn't hurt to try. They're about the price of OEM pads or so, and they're supposed to perform like a lot of the other pads that are out there. For example, these Clubsport pads perform similar to the Ferrota DS 2500s or the Endless ME20s, and the endurance compound is very similar to the DS 3.12s, Endless MA45Bs, and the Brembo RE10s. SP Motorsports also gave me this list of recommended tires to use with these different pad compounds. So I have no experience with these pads yet. We're installing them now. In maybe a year or so after I've run out the pads, I will come back with another video, of course, reporting back and let you know what I'm going to do next. All right, now let's talk about these brakes. With any brake job, there's always something that can get you, and I want to cover those topics today. Real quick, like most Porsche brakes, they have brake pad sensors. You don't need to reuse those if you don't want to. You can reuse them. You can buy new ones. It's up to you. Some people have had trouble pulling these sensors out. I have not had trouble. I'm going to show you. Just use needle nose pliers, grab them like this, and work them out. But they can break. They are kind of brittle. They're meant to wear. So if they break, no big deal. You can get rid of the sensors altogether. It's just 2 wires in there. They come together at the sensor, and when the brake pads wear down, they wear down the sensor, eventually break the wires. Circuit's no longer closed, and you get a nice little warning light in the cockpit saying, hey, time to change your brake pads. So to keep that light from coming on, all you got to do is clip these wires and bring them together, whatever method you like, twist them together, electrical tape, butt connectors, I don't care. Do what you think is right as long as it's out of the way and not going to cause a hazard. Keep that connection closed, no big deal. It's as if you still have sensors. It's up to you. I like having sensors because, well, they're there. I just like things to be the way they were supposed to be, I guess. So I had no problem pulling the ones out on the other side, and we'll see how it goes on this side. And if it doesn't go well, just clip and tie them together. No big deal. All right, the caliper. What sucks about this is a car that's probably going to see a lot of brake pad changes, Porsches, track cars, whatever. You'd think you could just pull the pads out here, but they changed this caliper design, this monoblock caliper. There's no opening to just pull the pads out, so the caliper has to come off. Now, some Brembo brakes are attached by big hex bolts on the back side. This one is not, as many Porsche calipers are. It's caliper bolts this way through the caliper, and these are hex or Allen keyholes. They are 10 millimeter, so you make sure you have that, either a ratchet attachment or a big hex key. And these bolts are recommended to be replaced according to Porsche. Am I going to replace them today? No, I'm going to use them again. You can do that. Some people do. I'm not recommending you do whatever you want. Why does Porsche say that? Are they torque to yield bolts? Have they stretched? No, not likely. So the big deal here is that these are steel bolts and the carrier that they bolt into is aluminum. So two dissimilar metals, aluminum's pretty soft. I don't think these bolts are gonna be stretching. I think the aluminum is gonna be taking the brunt of it. And I think Porsche just wants you to have absolutely fresh bolts and threads. So with that being said, folks, I would say do not start this project until you have a thread chaser kit, not a tap and die set, a thread chaser kit. And this one right here, available from Amazon, has all the things you need to do the brake pad change and chase all the threads on your GT4. This kit has the correct chasers for the whole car. It's got the 12 by 1.5 for the caliper bolts and the 6 by 1.0 for the bracket bolts. It's 29 bucks or so, and if you use my Amazon Associates link down below, I'll get a tiny little commission. You won't pay any extra, and after you've clicked that link, anything you put in your cart, I get a small commission too, so that's how you can really support your YouTubers. Use those Amazon Associate links, go buy some Quick Jacks or something, that'll really help us out. So you want this thread chaser kit because you want these bolts and the holes pristine. When you put these in, you don't want any resistance. And if you don't have this thread chaser kit, you're gonna have get there-itis. That's what us pilots say. Trying to get there and we make mistakes, forcing ourselves to complete the job, right? And if you don't have that thread chaser kit, you may be tempted to force these bolts in and it'll cause a world of hurt. You may have to recut the threads on the carrier, may have to insert new threads, or just buy a whole new carrier, and that's expensive and time consuming. You don't want any of that, folks, so please, every time, clean and chase these bolts and holes. That will save the day. Now, I'm only going to reuse these bolts once. There's another solution I'm going to tell you about in a minute. The other weird thing about these calipers is it's got a hard brake hose coming out the back, not a soft hose like a lot of cars do. That hard brake hose does eventually go to a soft hose, but all the hoses and wires here are on a bracket. You need to remove two 10mm bolts to get that bracket loose to allow the play as necessary. Otherwise, pulling this caliper off, it doesn't go very far without loosening that bracket. And those 10mm bolts steel into the aluminum carrier. You want to chase those as well, and that thread chaser kit's going to have the right thread chasing in there for you. You'll find that the bracket's kind of springing and always trying to force you to put the bolt in at a bad angle and cross thread. It sucks, it's nerve-wracking. The first time I looked at it, I almost cross-threaded and I just said, no, we're not gonna have this. I don't want that to happen. So thread chaser kit, folks, best advice in this video. The caliper is really heavy, so once it comes off, you want to hook it to the spring with a brake caliper hook that's very sturdy, or maybe have something else to set it on over here. Also, some people use elastic bands. I've never done that. But you don't want to drop this because that metal brake pipe will bend or break, crack. Again, it's going to create a really bad day for you. And if you're like me, you're changing these pads right before a track day. Ugh. Now, what about the rears? Is there anything different? Just a little bit. It's exactly the same, except the caliper bolts are not the hex key bolts. They are T55 Torx, so make sure you have that, a really good one. And the bracket with the hoses and wires has two 10mm bolts, but they're in slightly different locations. Either way, anytime you're using hex or Torx, make sure that hole is nice and cleaned out. You don't want to strip those. Now, you can avoid all these risks and headaches if you change up the system a little bit. You see, Tarot Engineering makes this really cool stud kit. I think SP Motorsports sells the same one. And essentially, instead of using these caliper bolts, you're going to install studs semi-permanently into the carrier. They get mounted in, and then you just hook your caliper on there and then top it off with some nuts to hold it on. This is great because when you remove those nuts, your caliper's not going to go anywhere, and then you can lift it off as you need to. They also make a stud kit for the bracket bolts, so you don't strip that out as well. It's only 25 bucks for the whole car for the bracket stud kit, but it's about like 300 bucks or so for the caliper stud kit. I will definitely be doing that next time. That's why I'm just reusing these bolts this one time, and then we'll switch over to the stud kit for the next pad change. Lastly, the rotor, folks, mine has no lip on it, no cracks. It looks to be in good condition. I'm gonna run it this year and see how far we can go with that. All right, if that isn't enough information for you, you can watch me try to edit down my full brake change on this side of the car as quickly as possible, and I think you should be pretty comfortable changing the brakes on your GT4 or 991 GT3. All right, let's get started. There's all sorts of ways to change your brakes, and here's how I do mine. I'm going to use a small pry bar to carefully pry the pads back and away after I've opened the reservoir, of course, to allow fluid to move easier. Never pry on the pad itself, just the metal backing. Now I'm going to remove the sensors. First, pull the wire from the little wire holder, then grab carefully with needle nose pliers. Hold tight and pull them out like teeth. If you don't hold hard enough, you might slip and crack the sensors, and then you'll either have to replace them or clip them and tie them off. If you need to replace them, they unplug right here with this connector. Now on the back side of the front, you're gonna find the bracket that holds the lines and the wires. It's got two 10mm bolts, one here and one where you can't see. On the back wheels, you're gonna see the two 10mm bolts on the top of the knuckle area. Use a 10mm socket and any necessary extensions to remove those 10mm bolts. Now the bracket is free and giving you more slack in the lines. I'm gonna take a hook, hang it on the spring, and remove the caliper bolts. Remember, these are 12mm hex bolts. Pull them out, but remember, when you get the last one out, the caliper would fall, so you gotta hold on to it. Pick it up carefully, not a lot of room there to get it off the rotor, and then hook it on the hook. For the rears, remember it's a T55 Torx. Always make sure your sockets are fully seated in these bolts to minimize stripping. Pop the pads out, try not to drop them. Easy enough. Here is a piece of the brake sensor that's stuck in there. It's just a little metal clip. I was able to put it right back on the sensor. I chose to use some compressed air to blow out the holes, and then I chased them. The caliper holes are 12 by 1.5. Chase them out, make sure they're nice and clean and the threads are smooth. I also used the chaser nut on the caliper bolts to get those threads nice, or you can use the thread file that comes in the kit. Do the same with the bracket bolts and holes. Those are 6 by 1.0. Be sure to clean up your caliper using degreaser or brake cleaner. I prefer degreaser, it's easier on the caliper. And then if you like, you can grease these pins a little bit, but these track brakes are gonna squeak either way. Then I just use my hands to push in the pistons individually. They try to pop out a little bit when I press each one in, but you can make it happen or use a piston retraction tool. Pop your pads into place, and now you can put it back on the rotor. It is a tight fit with those fresh pads. Reinstall your caliper bolts. Remember, if they give you any resistance, you need to chase those threads again. Now you need to torque down the caliper bolts. Tarot torques their stud kit down to 54 foot-pounds, but I've also heard up to 62 foot-pounds for the Porsche, so I'm just gonna go right in the middle around 55. Realign the bracket and install those 10mm bolts. This is challenging. The bolts usually go in slightly misaligned because the bracket is hard to position correctly, so please be careful here. This is exactly where you're gonna strip something. I'll reposition the pads so I have easiest access to putting those sensors back into place. You can push them in with your fingers, but you'll probably need to use the tips of your needle nose to finish the job and get them fully seated. After you have both sensors in place, route the wires accordingly, and that's it for that wheel. Move on to the others. Don't forget to properly bed your pads and top off your brake fluid or change it if necessary. All right, folks, that's it. I hope this video was super helpful for you to change your brake pads without any issues on your GT4 991 GT3. And of course, you know what to do if you did find it helpful. Hit that like button, consider subscribing, and hit the bell to be notified of future Porsche content. Got lots of stuff. Don't forget, I got the brake bleed video. I got other brake videos if you need them, and lots of other GT4 content. Thanks so much for watching the Jet Fuel Only channel. We'll see you next time.